So hey there everyone, welcome to today's webinar, What is Oral Saliva Testing and Why Should I Care? There's actually a lot of great information packed into this webinar, so again, thank you for attending today. I'm Luke Kibbe, and I'm going to be both your moderator and presenter today. Before we get started, here's just a couple of housekeeping items. This webinar is interactive, so please submit your questions in the chat box. I'll keep an eye on them as best I can, and during the Q&A session at the end, I will try to answer them. If there's anything I can't answer or if we run out of time, I'll be sure to try to answer them via email after the webinar. Also, this webinar is going to be recorded, so everybody should receive an email of the presentation and the link of the recording after the webinar is over. Just give me a couple days, you should see it in your email, probably Monday morning sometime. And lastly, I'm going to be having everybody's phones muted during the presentation. So if you do have questions, again, please fill out the chat box during the presentation. And as I said earlier, I am the presenter today. I've been writing on the drug testing industry for years now. And we at Clean Fleet have been around since 2001, helping companies save lives and protecting assets. Clean Fleet serves companies nationwide in helping manage their drug and alcohol testing programs. We even have two local collection sites in the Portland, Oregon metro area. And we are the experts in the industry as well as state and federal drug laws that affect companies today. With that, let's get started. Make sure my clicker is working. All right. So with approximately 75% of all drug abusers employed, either full-time or part-time, drug testing is an important safety issue in all workplaces for human resources and safety professionals. Because of this, the majority of companies surveyed recently perform some form of drug testing in their establishment, regardless of federal regulations mandating certain employees to be tested. So now, many companies are trying to decide which testing technique is best for their company. Today, there's many choices to choose from, with urine, oral, and hair testing as the most common. The most widely used testing method, of course, is laboratory-based urine drug testing, which often leads employers to believe this method is the safest bet for their company. However, this may not always be true. In this webinar, we will talk about the details of oral testing, how it compares with other testing methods, why it can be so effective in your company's drug testing program, and what you need to do to get started. So what exactly is oral testing? Also known as oral fluid or saliva testing, historically, the clinical use of oral testing actually occurred as early as 1836. In patients with bronchitis, and has recently rose the ranks as a trusted method of testing today. And here's why. All drugs, pharmaceutical and otherwise, undergo a series of biochemical reactions in the body. These reactions release the active compound, usually the psychoactive element of the drug, and then gradually degrade into slightly different structures. These structures, also called metabolites, are then excreted from the body in a variety of ways. Oral tests measure that active parent compound, and when detected in a positive result, it indicates that the drug has entered the bloodstream. This is why compounds that are present in a person's blood are present in their saliva as well. This occurs within a matter of minutes and continues for as long as the drug is in the person's system, usually 2 days or so. When it comes to looking at the positive result, higher levels of the parent compound tends to indicate a higher level of the drug contained within the body. Scientifically, this is why saliva levels comes closest to measuring impairment, although there is no method that can accurately measure true impairment. You can understand why saliva comes closest when compared to urine testing, because urine tests do not measure the parent compound. They measure the byproduct compounds, or the metabolites, which do not correspond with impairment levels. Today, oral testing is being considered for federally regulated drug testing, such as for the trucking industry. Last year, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services published proposed oral fluid mandatory guidelines in the Federal Register, which is a first step towards permitting the use of oral fluid specimens for federal drug testing that includes the trucking industry, as I just mentioned, pipeline, aviation, bus and other transportation companies, and transportation of hazardous materials. Oral testing has a shorter detection window compared to other methods. In fact, oral testing has the ability to detect drug use within the first few hours, a window of time that can be missed by urine testing. And oral testing can detect most drugs from 1 to 4 days after last use. Urine testing, on the other hand, can only detect a substance once it has passed through the body and is on its way out. As we mentioned earlier, when a drug is detected with oral testing, higher levels of the parent compound indicate higher levels of the drug contained within the body. Remembering that there is no truly accurate method of measuring impairment with any method of testing, it is interesting that an increased concentration in saliva is because of the drug is still in the process of metabolism. It hasn't fully broken down yet, where low concentrations in urine is due to the fact that the drug is still undergoing this metabolism breakdown, where it will show up more in urine later. So hypothetically, if one was to do both an oral and urine drug test on someone, the results, the positive results of a high saliva concentration and low urine concentration is a positive indication of recent drug use, but because it hasn't broken down in the body yet. The oral testing method shows detection faster than other testing methods of urine and hair. For example, marijuana is usually detected within 1 hour with oral testing, compared to 4 to 6 hours with urine and 5 to 7 days for hair. Again, that's how the breakdown, the metabolites are being broken down over time, getting to those points. Opiates, again, can be detected within 1 hour compared to 2 to 5 hours with urine and 5 to 7 days with hair testing. Like we mentioned at the beginning, there are different testing methods better suited for different reasons to test, which we'll look at later. But the most important factor for companies is how well and accurate all the testing methods are. And when you compare oral testing with the industry standard of urine testing, we find oral has been outperforming urine lab-based testing since 2009 and has now nearly doubled the positivity rate in 2015, according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Just take a look at the numbers. With marijuana, oral had 3 times greater the positivity rate than urine and nearly double in every other drug. And this is based on over 8 million drug tests. So we've highlighted a few advantages of oral testing, but let's walk through all of them now. Like we just shown, oral testing nearly doubles the positivity rate compared to urine drug tests. Oral testing also eliminates collection hassles like shy bladder or the need of gender-specific collectors. Next, oral testing eliminates drug test cheating, which we'll go into more detail later. It is also scientifically accurate, and minimal working time is lost if handled for an on-site drug test, regardless of post-accident, reasonable suspicion, or any other random drug testing for on-sites. Next, saliva samples can be collected anywhere and in minutes, which is great for on-site or post-accident testing, and I'll go over some examples of that in a little bit. And finally, oral testing is non-invasive. This helps solve sensitivity drug testing issues like gender, observation, and privacy, which is often associated with urine collection. So let's move and walk through the process of collecting, collecting an oral sample, what that process looks like with someone. Oral collections are easy to perform and are typically conducted at the place of employment for on-sites reducing the loss of productivity at the workplace, though they can technically be tested anywhere with oral, of course. And we always have with us, we always have lab-based orals, what we recommend for anybody. So there's still going to be those confirmation testings in a lab. The first step for any test is having the collector to positively identify the donor or donors to be tested. And after this, the collector explains the test procedure to the donor or donors. Then there's a 10-minute direct observation period during which the donor will not smoke, consume food, or drink any fluids, and this is important. Now the testing process can actually begin. The collector first places the collection pad in the donor's cheek and gum. They can gently rub it until the pad is moist. Once the pad is saturated, the donor leaves the pad in their mouth for 5 minutes. After the 5 minutes, the collector places the pad in a vial. The handle of the collection device is snapped off at the rim of the vial. The vial is sealed, and the donor initials the seal. The entire process takes just 5 minutes. And turnaround times for results are done quickly for companies like us at CleanFleet in order to help companies drive timely hiring decisions. And oral fluid samples are sent by overnight delivery and are typically tested on the day they arrive at our laboratory. Negative results are often released within 24 hours, and non-negative screens undergo confirmatory testing and are typically released within an additional 24 to 72 hours. But before we go into why it's so effective in your company's drug testing program and what you need to do to get started, let's go over some common myths about oral drug testing and discuss their realities. So we're just going to cover 2 of those today. The first myth is oral testing is not accurate. And I've had people ask me this several times actually at recent events. But the reality is the results of oral fluid testing may have greater relevance to understanding the effects of drug abuse and assessing an individual's behavior, job performance, and safety risk than the results from urine testing. Oral fluid actually provides a blood equivalent results because it measures molecules similar to those found in blood plasma. As with any alternative drug testing method, much of the accuracy depends on the quality of the actual device being used to collect the sample for the labs. That is why CleanFleet works with the most widely accepted oral testing device on the market today and is FDA approved for lab-based testing. Actually, I skipped myth 2. So the second myth that actually comes up again quite often is that the window of detection with oral fluid testing is too short to detect drugs. And this is sort of funny. It's everybody wants a shorter window of detection, but now is it too short? But the reality is, the drug transfer to oral fluid from blood occurs as the drug is in the bloodstream. Therefore, detection time starts within minutes of ingestion and continues for as long as the drug remains in the bloodstream. Drug detection by oral fluid testing is more effective than urine testing over a comparable time period. And as always, with any drug test, the window of detection will be affected by many personal factors, really. And this includes the drugs being detected, what type of drug is being detected, the size of the dose, how much they're using, how it's entered the body, smoking, ingested, do you have acute versus chronic use of the drug, and then of course the personal differences and variations in metabolism and other factors. So why should companies care? Let's take a look at why your managers should care about oral testing and how to best utilize it in the workplace. At the recent Oregon Governor's Occupational Safety and Health Conference, OGOSH, which is one of the largest of its type in the country actually, its I had many safety managers asking how they can prevent their employees from potentially trying to cheat a drug test. Drug test cheating, of course, is a major concern because urine testing is usually susceptible to adulteration, tampering, or substitution. And that's why urine testing has validity testing efforts and precautions like putting blue dye in the toilet water. There's retests or observed collections. Due to this, there are many myths that come up at truck stops or water cooler tanks that's on this subject, but many are starting to realize oral testing is not just difficult to cheat, it's nearly impossible to cheat. And why is this? There's really two main reasons. First, lab-based oral fluid collections takes place in the presence of both the donor and the collector during the whole process of the test. When done correctly, the 10-minute wait that I mentioned was important before, the test actually cycles the saliva those 10 minutes. So it sort of replenishes itself and flushes out for, in essence, fresher saliva. So if you put something in your mouth, a lot of people like to think that the Banaka alcohol spray would work to cover up drugs, for example. It just doesn't work because that 10-minute period, the saliva is going to recycle itself. And that's why we make sure no one eats anything, smokes, or has any kind of fluid during that time frame. So, and then the second reason was typical cheating methods such as switching samples or adding something to a sample are virtually impossible to successfully pull off. Even if a product existed that could mask the presence of drugs in saliva, but as of right now, there isn't. There's just no opportunity to try to switch something during this process because the collector is going to be there the whole time. And compare this to urine testing. There's no weird devices strapped to the leg or synthetic urine that is supposed to trick the test. I don't know how many times we've seen weird devices come through our collection sites and some of the strange stories we've heard from other companies. But oral testing is basically cheat-proof. And if you want more proof on that, just do a Google search on the internet. You'll find hundreds of thousands of hits for cheating on a urine drug test, but only a handful for oral fluid testing. And it's funny, usually those tips on getting past an oral fluid test, drug test, it's usually just wait 10 days. Just get it out of your system because there isn't really a way to cheat the test. So let's take a quick step back. Urine and hair testing do have a place in your company drug testing program. Urine is widely accepted from federal guidelines to being the most common method of testing, while hair testing, with its long detection of a month to month, is actually really good for pre-employment testing. You can sort of almost see the history of drug use during that time frame. Oral testing can be used for any of these testing reasons, but we find it the most impactful for reasonable suspicion, post-accident, and any on-site testing. So let's chat a little bit about reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion testing comes about when managers suspect that someone is abusing drugs. That could potentially lead to a safety situation or loss of productivity. Because oral testing detects drugs in the system with the shortest window, it is best situated to see if the suspicion is in fact a fact. Oral testing is also great for post-accident because there's no need to leave the accident site or the need of a bathroom. So if a driver was in a vehicle accident, for example, non-DOT testing can be done at the site of the accident. So for example, if you're in a sales job and there's a policy, they're driving a company vehicle, getting a fender bender, got to check for, actually with the new OSHA laws, there's been damage to the vehicle that could cost more than $1,000. So the policy says we need to drug test them. You could technically, theoretically, send someone out there, have the collector do the oral swab test, again, just taking 5 minutes while actually on site there, and then the results are going to be sent about a day or a couple of days later. obviously doesn't work currently for the trucking industry or for truck drivers that are federally regulated, but that should be coming potentially down the road soon, as the federal regulations should be including it shortly. Also, oral testing is nearly impossible to cheat, which is great for the on-site or post-accident testing. Both of these reasons, both of these tests can be done on-site. Say, like if it was at the job site, a forklift driver in a warehouse, for example, the oral testing can be done on-site, which leads us to why oral testing is perfect for any on-site testing. Oral testing for on-site is actually such a great option because you can have multiple employees tested at the same time. We've actually had an on-site where we had 12 employees in an office room with just our single collector, and was able to get them all tested and the paperwork filled out within 20 minutes, and the collector was in and out in an hour. How could this happen? And here's how. This is sort of the cool process. With the employees all sitting in front of the collector in this office room, he had all the paperwork and the swab kits in front of them, ready to go. After explaining the process and giving the 10-minute waiting period with no fluids in their mouths, no smoking, no eating during that time frame, the collector went to each employee to start the process one at a time. While they had the swabs in their mouths for the 5 minutes, all the employees were able to fill out the chain of custody paperwork that's required, and then the collector collected the samples from each employee one at a time, and that was basically it. They're already done and could go right back to work since they're already at the workplace. And also on-site oral testing, there's just less costs associated with employee downtime away from work, or if we're going to a collection site, and reduced number of days to making a hiring decision usually. So it's a pretty good method to use versus just urine and needing a bathroom on site. So let's talk about the legality of things, especially important for larger companies with multiple sites across the U.S. Let's take a look at the legality of lab-based oral testing. Basically, oral testing is nearly universally accepted across all states and jurisdictions except for Vermont, San Francisco, which has got a lot of fun little specific laws for the city, and the state of Maine. And in Maine, there's just so much confusion with oral testing that in the state that they often just go to complying with federal regulations, which, as we'll mention later, about as soon as October might be available for oral testing in various situations federally. So regarding the federal acceptance, as I mentioned before, the Department of Health and Human Services back in 2015 published proposed oral fluid mandatory guidelines in the Federal Register, which was that first step in permitting it in federal drug testing for the trucking industry, like truck drivers, and other DOT modes that include pipeline aviation, hazmat, bus, and other transportation. And we should see this happening as soon as October is what we're expecting, give or take, of course, the government taking its time on different things and wanting to push stuff back. But everybody in the industry right now is saying October is the time frame everybody's pointing to this year. And speaking on legality, it's also important to quickly note that there's no FDA-approved instant oral drug testing kits. So we've been talking about lab-based this whole time. We're going to quickly talk about instant oral drug testing kits. And why is this important? Let's just take the state of Oregon as an example. Oregon law states that only FDA-approved instant testing kits can be used for drug testing. Therefore, no instant oral tests are allowed in the state. And this is true for many states across the nation, and is why we recommend a lab-based oral testing in any situation. So how can oral testing be implemented today in your company? First, once a company understands what it hopes to achieve with oral testing, It'll be easier to decide how to set up the program. Companies need to identify why, how, whom, and when to test with oral tests. Then the company policy should be revised based on the objectives that were identified, and the testing procedure section specifically must reflect oral fluid testing. The policy should explain how tests will be conducted and how results will be reported. After the policy is updated, a company's management team must understand how the new oral testing program works, so be sure to train them. The company should review the revised policy with this management team and ensure that they understand the new collection procedures. Finally, now that everything's in place, the policy's been revised, and the management team is trained, the company's ready to begin testing. Just be sure to announce the program changes to all employees. A company can go through this whole process, especially working with a company like Clean Fleet, helping with the policies, in just a couple weeks to start using oral testing in their workplace. As I mentioned earlier, or as I mentioned, at Clean Fleet, we are committed to offering a comprehensive selection of workplace drug testing solutions. We offer oral, urine, and hair to meet the needs of clients from different industries around the nation, and we can work with you on the process of updating your policy so it meets legal standards wherever you are, in whichever mode you might be representing in federal guidelines. Be sure to call us or reach out to me if you have any interest starting this process. With that, though, we're done talking about the oral testing, how effective it is, how to implement it in your company. So let's move to questions. I know right now I haven't seen any questions typed in, so I'm going to give just a couple minutes, about a minute or two, just to see if anybody's typing anything in. I know there's a lot of other myths out there on drug testing that I can walk through as well as we wait. And I'm curious if you guys wanted and are willing, has anybody already implemented oral testing for any testing reason yet in the workplace? And if not, are you currently looking to see if oral testing is good, and what methods or what reasons to test would you be willing to look at? If you guys want to write me up on the chat box, that'd be great. We can chat about that. But going back to some other myths that are out there. Oh. So can you elaborate? One question popped up. Can you elaborate on the federal guidelines for instant testing in Oregon? As far as federal guidelines go, that's nationwide. State laws, it doesn't matter. Federal laws trump state laws. So if for the trucking industry and the other safety-sensitive roles affected by federal guidelines, no matter what, those are the rules that you're going to be following. So for example, a truck driver cannot be used, especially for random testing. You can't use oral testing. In the state perspective, if it was just the state of Oregon, I mean, really the guidelines on instant testing is it has to be an FDA-approved device for an instant test. That includes alcohol instant tests, urine instant tests, oral instant tests, and I don't think there's anything specifically right now for hair testing, but if there was, regardless, it has to be FDA approved for instant, not lab-based, but instant tests. I'm not sure how many other states actually have it. I haven't looked through every single one of them, but there's definitely multiple states that are similar to Oregon, needing FDA approved instant tests. We had another question pop up. What's a collector's perspective on oral testing? And it's actually it's a good question. The collector's perspective usually loves oral testing just because of the simplicity of the process of an oral drug test. Compared to urine, you know, there's gender-specific reasons, especially if it's like, say, a follow-up drug test that needs someone specific. You need to have a bathroom on site, or a clean bathroom with a sink, and it's one at a time. A collector would have to do the process one at a time, taking so much time to get through, say, 10, 15, 20 people that's being drug tested in this, say, like if it was on site, for example. Where oral testing, like I mentioned before, I mean, we had 12 people in a room, and in one, just getting the whole batch of them in and out in like 20 minutes, and our collector could just leave. So it was really, really, oral testing is just, it's something we want to recommend, especially if you're not federally regulated and you want to do something for, if you have a random program, for example, replacing it with oral testing. If you want to use it for reasonable suspicion, it's the quickest way, that's the shortest detection window to verify that. So as far as a collector's perspective, it's also the cheat-proof aspect of it. It's just, you can't really cheat the system yet, and it's just less that the collector has to look for and worry about. Is it of the right temperature with urine, for example? Is there an additive? Does it, I don't know if someone wants to smell it, but does it smell like apple juice, for example? So that's the collector's perspective and what they want to hear. If you have any other questions, feel free. I know we got potentially 15, 20 minutes more of questions if we want. As I promised, I mentioned I'll walk through a couple more myths on oral testing. So this is sort of an interesting one. So one of the myths is the federal government does not permit the use of oral fluid testing. While this is true for, like, say, truck drivers and those different modes of transportation with the DOT, for example, there are many agencies of the federal government that uses oral fluid testing. So, for example, some departments within the Federal Probation Service currently use oral fluid test devices. Other agencies, such as branches of the military and the Bureau of Prisons, actually may not restrict the use of oral fluid testing internally. Or, of course, there's the private sector organizations that it falls under their respective authority. They can do oral testing for their companies. Also, the Drug Testing Advisory Board, DTAB, in other words, is open the door for permitting lab-based oral fluid testing in federal drug testing programs. In the summer of 2011, DTAB submitted a letter to SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health and Safety Association that I mentioned earlier. They made a recommendation that federal agencies can begin the formal process of developing testing protocols for lab-based oral fluid testing, sort of rapid results or point of collection oral fluid testing was not included, and that's, again, it's those different state laws that affect instant oral. There's no FDA-approved device, so same thing here. They didn't include the instant devices. And then finally, in 2012, the HHS, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, approved that recommendation for the Drug Testing Advisory Board. And like I said, it's coming down the road for federally regulated employees. We do think October is going to be the time frame this year where we see that happening. And I'm going to see if there's one more good myth that's here. Otherwise, I'll let you guys go a little early. One of the questions, or one of the myths that I find interesting, we sort of touched on it too. The myth is that it's too complicated to switch from a urine testing program to a lab-based oral fluid testing program. And really, making the switch to lab-based oral fluid is easier than you think. Usually, to go through the whole process of updating your policy, management sort of deciding how you want to use it, who you want to use it for, it really just takes a couple of weeks. If you're not the experts on state laws that might be affecting your company. And that's why companies like Clean Fleet are here to be the experts for you guys. Make sure your policies are legally standing, whether it's by state, by jurisdiction, or by federal modes that might be affecting you. I know sometimes the construction industry, for example, or pipeline industry might be, the employees for that company might be under different transportation modes, federal guidelines underneath that. And sometimes they're slightly different. So if you need help making sure where if it's accurate, your policy is accurate, or if you just want to update it, we can definitely help. With that, I am going to end this a little early. I wanted to let you guys know about our next upcoming webinar. We do this every month. Usually it's the third Thursday of every month. Next month in May, we're going to chat about what is reasonable suspicion training and why is it so important. This one's, it is interesting because federally, there's they have to be 2 hours of training for reasonable suspicion training for management. And those 2 hours are split up between drug and alcohol. Usually that's best practice. What we do at Clean Fleet, we can do a shorter reasonable suspicion program if you're not federally regulated, but we do go through this whole process of what are the different types of drugs, how can you see it affecting the person, and what legalities are there around what companies need to do to back themselves up, knowing to get them tested. And so we can we'll have a webinar on that whole process next month, and I think probably in about a week or so we'll figure out what we want to do for June. But keep an eye out in your emails on that one. With that, like I said, we're going to end it a little early. I do thank you guys for all joining me today. This concludes our webinar. Thank you for attending, and have a great day.